Tune in, iHeart, and on Odyssey.
If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Today is Pope Benedict's funeral. Of course, he died over the holiday. And you may be wondering, well, is President Biden going to attend? Fox News reporter caught up to him on the tarmac and asked,
"You're not attending his funeral tomorrow, though. Why?"
Well, why do you think?
Well, but you tell me.
You know why? I can't.
You can tell me, sir.
The reason I'm not attending the funeral tomorrow is because it takes an entourage of 1,000 people to show up, not literally. But we would move everything in the wrong direction. I inquired about it. And people are attending, most of their apostolic delegates, we would just get in the way.
It's hard to hear because of Air Force One or whatever that was, Marine One behind him. But he's not attending. Why do you think? Oh, I have some ideas. I have some ideas.
There's a big entourage coming for him. If he shows up.
Yeah, the logistics of it. We would get in the way. He said, "Really." Is that the reason he's not attending?
Is Kamala Harris going to go at least? Because isn't that what vice presidents do? They go to world leaders' funerals.
I don't think she's attending. Why? Why do you think?
Well, because they don't like Catholics.
They like ceremonial Catholics, ornamental Catholics like Joe Biden.
We call them Catholic lights.
No, not Catholic light. Not Catholic light. They have nothing to do with Catholicism. If you're a pro-abort-on-demand politician, if you're a tool of the teachers union opposing opportunities to minority children, largely minority children, low-income families, low to middle-income families, largely disproportionately minority, if you don't know what a woman is, then you can call yourself whatever you want, just like a man can call himself a woman. Doesn't make it so. Ornamental Catholics, people who use that as a label to pander come election time, like Joe Biden does and always has. A favorite observation of mine from Pope Benedict, so appropriate for our time, particularly as people see every political spat as an existential threat to world order. He wrote in a book, Truth and Tolerance, which was a compilation of his lectures, one of his observations. Whenever politics tries to be redemptive, it promises too much. Where it wishes to do the work of God, it becomes not divine, but demonic. And isn't that our culture, particularly as promulgated by the left? Politics is the path of redemption. And when it does that, it becomes not divine, but demonic. Doesn't know its place. Because we don't know our place vis-a-vis the Almighty. So important, those words. Dan Henninger, writing about Pope Benedict in the context of Putin and Xi, who see a weakening of the moral character of the West and an opportunity for their totalitarian interests. I don't know if you saw this over the holidays. There was like a Santa Putin piece of communist propaganda put out by the Russians. And it was a gay couple with a transgender child. That's how it opens. Getting gender-neutral toys. And then Santa Putin comes down the chimney, changes the picture of the gay couple to a man and a woman, makes the boy a boy, and leaves boys' toys. So now you have, I mean, it's remarkable. And again, you have a godless communist KGB commissar like Putin using Christianity against the West. That's how the script has been flipped. And Pope Benedict the 16th, was a ardent defender of the West and the Judeo-Christian values that are the foundation of the West. Reason and faith, he wrote, come to each other's assistance. Only together will they save man. Entranced by an exclusive reliance on technology, reason without faith is doomed to flounder in an illusion of its own omnipotence. Faith without reason risks being cut off from everyday life. As in comment on that observation by Benedict, Henninger wrote, this writer's longstanding solution to reducing the country's problems has been, go to church on the weekend. Learn that, in fact, you're not number one and not alone. It has become unfashionable, if not forbidden, to talk about religious belief in the context of public life, the religious right and all that. But perhaps the moment is right to revive Benedict's argument for religion's proper role in organizing a coherent, self-confident society or nation. Perhaps it is. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Mary FioRito, who's with the Ethics and Public Policy Center and was a close confidant of Cardinal George. Mary, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So your reflections on Pope Benedict's importance.
Oh, he's going to be a doctor of the church, which is reserved for only those, among the saints who have made the greatest intellectual contributions. You really have to, it's Augustine and, Ambrose and Catherine of Siena and one of the greatest saints within 100 years is going to be a doctor of the church. There are few who have made the type of intellectual contributions that he has made. Yet at the same time, everything he wrote was very accessible. I used to be very intimidated by his writings because he just was so erudite. I thought they were sort of beyond me because I'm a lawyer and I'm not a theologian, but he wrote a series of books called Jesus of Nazareth that just essentially talk about the life of Jesus. And you can sit down and read those and, you can just be a high school graduate and you can understand what he's saying. He had such a love for the Lord that he wanted to make that love and that relationship not only known to other people, but he wanted to tell everyone, you can have this too. Everyone can have this kind of relationship with the Lord. And in fact, you look at, I think he's written 66 books and countless papal encyclicals. Someone was listing all of his works. Yet his very last words, while he was alive, according to his priest secretary, were, Jesus, I love you. And I think that just sort of sums up his whole life. Everything he did was out of love for the Lord. But he wanted people at all levels to be able to understand that love and to understand what it means for them personally. So, again, he could approach it as a great intellect, but also as a very simple man whose whole life can be summed up in those last words, Jesus, I love you.
Does does the fact that he stepped down when he felt he no longer could fulfill the duties, does that speak to his humility and love of the Lord?
Oh, absolutely, I think so. I mean, he recognized this is a job for someone who has to have a full grasp of all of their faculties, not just their mental faculties, which I think he had up until the end very much, but simply physically. He could not do the job as it needed to be done. And, again, he had, as you put it, the humility, which is, that's really, all the great saints say that's the one thing that the devil doesn't know is humility, because the devil is simply all about pride.
Yeah, and contrast that with all of our octogenarian politicians in this country.
Correct, who won't leave and know that it's past their time, yet they can't let go of the power, right? And they don't want to let go of the notoriety and the fame. And none of that meant anything to him. What meant, again, his whole life was focused on the Lord. What can I do to make him better known and loved? If I can't do this job, it is not right for me to stay. And I cannot imagine he didn't pray about that. My guess is probably for a couple of years before he did it. He didn't. This is a very measured man. He didn't do things quickly or lightly, although he did actually have a great sense of humor, but he certainly didn't do things, on a whim. So my guess is he really prayed about that. So absolutely, it speaks to his humility, and his love for the church. He put the church before himself.
Well, Mary, what are some stark differences between Pope Benedict and Pope Francis?
Oh, well, they're personality-wise, Amy. You have, an Argentinian who's very, very outgoing, who's very much an extrovert, who's very much a man of emotion, and you have a German, who's very much an intellectual. Who, Cardinal George always talked about what he said were the caricatures of Benedict, and one of them being that he was God's Rottweiler and the Panzer Cardinal and all of this, because he was the because he was the isn't that great? And the Panzer Cardinal is my other favorite, but
yeah, right.
Because he headed up the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is sort of, they called him God's watchdog and all of these things, because you had to correct errant theologians in that role. That was part of it. But as Cardinal George said, he was actually a very shy man. There's some great pictures that I don't know if you remember when Pope Benedict came to the United States and visited with the Bushes at the White House, and President and Mrs. Bush were so gracious to him and had all the flowers in the garden at the White House. They planted yellow and white tulips for the papal flag. They were just so that every small detail they attended to. It was so beautiful. But there's a really funny picture of Cardinal George sitting next to Pope Benedict at I think one of the seminaries in Washington, where they had evening prayer with all the priests, and just the looks on both of their faces. The Cardinal's looking very puzzled, and Pope Benedict is you can just see he's just pained to be in these public moments, because he was actually a very shy man. He didn't like doing any of that kind of stuff.
But beyond the personality, though, the real difference is where Benedict sought to take the church, consistent with his predecessor JP2, versus where Francis is taking the church and is poised to take it even further, and I mean in the direction of leftist politics, including sort of redefinitions of marriage, gender, perhaps coming.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I would go that far with Francis. And in fact, I have a friend who actually worked for Francis when he was Bergoglio and the Cardinal Archbishop of Argentina, who says, the way he sort of made out in the media isn't actually an accurate reflection of what he thinks. I think he may be surrounded by people who might share some of those ideologies, but I don't know that he himself would go that far. Again, you're quite correct, Dan, that Benedict's papacy was absolutely a continuation of John Paul II's. And, you look at some of the things Benedict did, particularly around the areas of sex abuse, very much moving in, removed incredibly powerful priest named Father Maciel, who headed up an order called the Legionnaires of Christ, who was unfortunately engaged in incredibly, both sinful and criminal behavior, and removed him. And he was, and people said he was too powerful to touch, and Benedict got rid of him. He was the one who put the brakes on Theodore McCarrick and silenced him and restricted his ministry. So, Benedict really moved on things. He was absolutely disgusted and appalled by any kind of, sexual impropriety and sexual abuse. So he was very, very firm on those. I think you have with Francis maybe a different sort of approach. He wants to be, what he says, accompanying people, welcoming people, and then perhaps leading them to Christ. I think Benedict's approach to telling people the truth would have been a little bit different, saying, justice requires that I tell you the truth about who you are as a human person and what God wants for your life. So I think it's more a difference in approach rather than a difference in belief. I don't think that Francis, believes in transgenderism or anything even close to that. I just think it's the approach. He feels you need to get to the person first, accompany them, then show them the truth. Whereas Benedict was more of a, we'll show you the truth first and then help you understand why this is good for you and why this means that God loves you, changing your life and living it according to God's plan.
I hope you're right. I know that Pope Francis, this is glossed over by the media, of course, that wants to make Pope Francis the first not Catholic Pope. But I know he called marriage redefinition an anthropological regression, and so that
Correct.
Speaks to his views. But I just, he's still a man, and he seems very taken by the sort of political debates of the day, and I don't mean sort of fundamental free societies versus totalitarian ones that John Paul II took up and that Benedict took up. I mean the identity politics of the day. And,
right.
We got a cardinal in Chicago who seems to be taken with those same issues.
Right. Well, he also called abortion. He said it's like hiring a hitman to solve a problem.
Yes.
I mean, and so he has been, actually, he doesn't pull any punches when it comes to some things. And he has sort of that, again, South American temperament, and he speaks very forcefully. And I think, you're quite right, Dan, that you do have sort of a secular media who doesn't really want that part of the Pope to be known to people. They want people to have this impression that he's saying you don't need to live your lives according to the Ten Commandments, and that's absolutely not what he's saying. I mean, take, for example, the "Who am I to judge" line. Do you remember that? He was speaking of a man who had same-sex attractions as part of his temperament, and, the Pope said, "Who am I to judge?" But he said, "Who am I to judge?" after saying, if this is someone who is trying to convert and live his life as the Lord would want, right, so chastely, then who am I to judge? But all you heard was the "who am I to judge," which went around the world as a soundbite. But that's not at all what he was saying. He was saying that people who have same-sex attractions are called to live chastely, and you judge an action, but you don't judge a person. That's what he was saying, and it got completely misconstrued. And so again, he's a very different person. I think his approach would be different to Benedict, but I believe he holds the deposit of the faith. I certainly haven't seen anything that leads me to think otherwise.
She is Mary FioRito. She's an attorney. She's a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and a former close confidant of Cardinal George in Chicago. Mary, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.
This is Jerry Boyer for townhall.com. 2022 was a down year for markets, which is a bad sign for the economy. Investors, unlike pundits and politicians, have skin in the game. So if they're wrong, they suffer real economic consequences. Markets are better forecasters than economic experts. Yes, better than people like me. When risk-sensitive investments are down much more than safer ones, this is a serious recession signal. The S&P is down roughly 20%. Stocks are down more than bonds. Risky bonds are down more than safe ones.